Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Wild User Interviews podcast with me, ABB. Today, I've got with me David Lachmish, co-founder at IKA Protocol. Welcome, David.
Hi, thank you for having me. Burger.
Did I pronounce that correctly?
David, yeah. Oh, the surname, and no one gets that correctly. It's with a H, so no one can really pronounce that. But it was close one.
Is the ha like la or mig or buck?
Lach. Or
Okay.
it's a Libyan origin surname, so it's Lachmish. Yeah.
Interesting.
Anyway,
Well, I'll practice it offline just so that the throaty doesn't torture our guests. Then
however people pronounce it, I accept it lovingly. It's fine.
thanks so much for making the time. I've been learning a lot about IKA recently. Why don't you give us a real quick intro about what IKA is, and then we can start to unpack a little bit, like who you are, what you got to where you're from, and most excitingly, where IKA is going.
Sure. My name is David. I've been an entrepreneur for over 15 years now. I've done a lot of things. It's been a pretty wild ride, but a lot of the things I did were around deep tech, cybersecurity, AI. The last company I founded before we founded Dwallet Labs, which is the development company behind IKA, was an AI company that I founded with Omer Sadiq, who is my co-founder at Dwallet Labs as well. Both of my co-founders, Omer and Yehonatan, they both come from a very deep cybersecurity background. Omer started an entire new category in cybersecurity called API security, and the first company in that space, Salt Security, which is a unicorn today. And my other co-founder, Jonathan, he led a nation-state level defensive cybersecurity project. He did his math degree when he was in high school, and he then also spent a few years as vulnerability researcher on Android kernel. So we have a lot of experience both on the defensive and the offensive side of cybersecurity. And we kind of gathered a pretty amazing team of cryptography researchers, engineers, cybersecurity experts in order to create IKA. And if I need to give the very high level pitch is with IKA is we wanted to solve what we believe is one of the biggest problems in Web3. It was one of the biggest problems 3 years ago when we started, and it's even bigger now, which is the interoperability problem. And the way that we looked at it, and again, that was from a cybersecurity and cryptography perspective, all of the existing solutions have very, very problematic assumptions and things that you need to sacrifice in order to use those solutions, including one of the most basic guarantees that you are supposed to have in a blockchain, which is zero trust. In a blockchain, you don't need to trust anyone. If you have BTC in your Bitcoin address, in your wallet, you know that even if all the miners try to collude, they can't sign away that Bitcoin. That is your Bitcoin, and no one can take it away from you. And that very basic premise and guarantee goes away the moment you want to do things in an interoperable way, the moment you want to operate across different networks. And we wanted to solve that. We realized that it would be a pretty difficult task, and we would need to create new cryptography in order to do that. And that's what we've been doing the past 3 years.
That is fascinating. One of the things that come to mind when I see a team of killer people is how do you end up in crypto specifically? And, there's been people that say crypto thinks about AI, AI doesn't think about crypto. When you look at the large scheme of things, like the real world, crypto is almost like a playground. It's people mostly having fun doing degenerate stuff and people coming up with new technologies, ideally to tackle a big problem. But I've always seen that chasm between people that already have solid solutions. They just skip the playground and they go to the real world. And it's almost like the chicken and the egg situation, like, well, how can we attract the solid technology to tackle the big problem when, maybe this side is not as mature or as lucrative or does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, by the way, I also think that this, maybe we'll talk about it later, this problem is exasperated by Web3 VCs, and the flow of money in the space goes towards actually, the more speculative and degenerate and, things that people get excited about, and not the real infrastructure that we need. Because at the end of the day, if you really believe in the vision of crypto and of Web3, you want to get to a decentralized, democratized, self-custody, self-governed world, right? That is what we're aiming for. And we know that there is a way for us to make this technology the rails of this new world, right? We know that. But in order to do that, we need to start treating this space seriously, right? We need to bring in serious people that are building serious tech in order for this to be able to be the rails of this new world. Because I agree, what we have right now is a lot of, cool, fun stuff, which I'm all for it. But this is not something that, the hundreds of trillions of dollars in the world will now run on this. And not just financially, like identity, right? All of the things that we believe need to run on decentralized rails, they won't do that until we have a robust enough infrastructure. So I 100% agree, but I do think that in the past years, we have been starting to see a shift with more serious teams, serious technology, people who understand how to build real scalable, serious infrastructure that takes into account how it will look if the entire world runs on this infrastructure. And you can see, with the early, we owe a lot of that to, early players in the space, but you can see that Ethereum, for example, is not designed for the entire world to run on Ethereum. You can see the scalability issues we are having with like a tiny, tiny fraction of the world trying to run on Ethereum. So obviously, and the people behind Ethereum and Vitalik, they brought a lot to the space and they progressed it immensely, but they were children when they started Ethereum. And this is how it looks like. This is reality. You need to start with a super robust design with people who have built these kind of systems that can support this kind of activity. So I think that we are starting to see that more and more. Obviously not enough, but I do think the space is kind of going there. And to answer the initial question before I went into that rant, I think that we believe in this vision. And we think that the privilege of being able to help redesign the world into a better world that is more democratic and decentralized and sovereign, I think this is an absolute privilege. Like I feel blessed that I'm alive at like this point of time where I can contribute to this shift, which I think is going to be one of the most meaningful shifts in human history.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think that you alluded to something that I may call, I don't know if anyone has coined this, but maybe we can call it like innovation value alignment. Like, for instance, you can have brilliant technical talent working on closed source AI at OpenAI, or in China, they're pushing the technology forward. It's just not particularly aligned with any set of values or perhaps negative values. So yeah, I'm often really intrigued as to what triggers that almost like pursuit for decentralization. Me personally, I grew up in Venezuela. I saw everything that can go wrong on that end of the spectrum. Then I moved to Australia and I saw everything that can go wrong on that end of the spectrum. And I was like, well, we need to just, go for the middle, decentralized, take out the middleman. There's a lot of lessons from both ends. But yeah, I'm fascinated that with every guest that comes on the podcast, everyone has a very personal story. And yeah, I'd be curious to know what aspects of your life has influenced that journey and what creates that value system.
So that's trip down memory lane, I guess. But yeah, I think that I was born in Israel and I grew up in Israel and I went through kind of by the way, most of our team is also based out of Tel Aviv. Today, I live in London, but I think I kind of went through a few identity crises as I went through the realities of growing up in Israel. And when I went to university, I started studying math and philosophy and law and a bunch of things. And I kind of bounced around between different things and tried to deconstruct and reconstruct my identity. I was also born into a religious family, so I grew up religious and I kind of had to like reconstruct that part of my life as well. And so there were a lot of kind of identity shifts and figuring out who I am and what do I think about this world and what are my values, living in a lot of other places that are not Israel and kind of experiencing the world, which is something I always tell people. Like, I think it has to be mandatory. Like, people have to live it doesn't even matter where, just like somewhere that is very different from wherever it is that they were born and raised, because like it is so hard to get perspective if you don't experience like a different, and not just visit for a week, like live for a year somewhere very different from wherever it is you grew up in. I think it has to be like a mandatory human experience, because it just makes better people. Like 100% of the cases that I encountered.
I agree. Where have you lived so far? So we've got London, Israel.
Yeah, I lived in the US. I lived in Berlin for a while. I lived there are a lot of different places, and I bounced around in also in a bunch of different places in for shorter terms. But I spent some time like a bit of a nomad, and I think, yeah, I kind of got this thirst of trying to get these like different types of experiences, different types of perspectives, and you realize that, you know, it's a cliche, but you realize that there's no universal truth. There's just perspectives, and the more perspectives you get to experience, the more you can, I don't know, be it kind of. I feel like it helps you chill out with a lot of things that people are very stressed for about, or feel very strongly about, that they shouldn't really. It's just because the specific way that they grew up and the perspective that they were born into.
100%. Are there, from all those places, any specific, I don't know, like milestones or like discoveries, anything that stands out to you? And if you want, while you think about it, I can come up with some myself. 2018, I traveled through like Eastern Europe, and it's really interesting to see those countries recovering from Soviet time, because Venezuela was like going down that path. So there was a lot of like lessons and reflections there around, you know, how it ends, how to bounce back. There was something about people being very humble, very hardworking. The place being fucking stunning, and no American going there. Like the few Americans I met along the way all said the same thing. All my friends things I'm gonna die. This is like out of balance for us. I went all the way into Russia. And the other thing that really stuck out with me with that trip was very refreshing to live outside like the American sphere. Like Australia is very Americanized. It's the same language. We hear all the news. I loved spending months at a time without hearing any news from the US. I mean, I guess I do speak the language, so maybe they were talking about it, but it was also very refreshing to be reminded that there's like many places in the world that are completely unrelated, unconnected, that just don't care and they're doing their own thing. So yeah, that was interesting for me. I guess I already knew it, but experiencing it was a nice reminder. Do you have any things like that?
I think in general, the first place I lived in like for a significant time, like over a year, that was outside of Israel, was in Berlin. And I think that was like a huge kind of reality check and slap to the face. So I lived in East Berlin. So it's very like East and West Berlin are just like completely different cities. And the East is a lot like you kind of described. A lot of people in East Berlin like never left East Berlin, like in their life, like 70 years old, that never left like their neighborhood. It's just insanity. And I kind of, you know, I used to go out on walk. I have a dog, which by the way, is still super old now. He's living with me in London, but he was with me in a lot of different places. And so I used to go on walks with one of my neighbors who grew up as a child in Soviet East Berlin. And we used to exchange stories, and it was just like his stories were sounded just like unbelievable to me. Like this is the childhood of this person. And then when I would tell him his stories, I would see the same look on his face, that my stories are unbelievable. And then it just kind of clicked to me how we just tend to normalize whatever insane kind of reality we were thrown into, you know, as like fetuses into this world. And like for us, that's the benchmark and that's normal. And everything else is weird and insane or whatever. And it made me realize that the human experience is very random, and there's no kind of set of things that are normal or are even desire. I mean, of course, there are things that are more desirable than others, but it's hard to paint an entire picture of this is the perfect or desirable culture, atmosphere, childhood, whatever experiences to go through. I think every set of experiences have their own type of way of shaping your personality. And if you can try and experience as many of them as possible, you will have a much more diverse and maybe even resilient personality.
Something that happened to me in Australia as well, you sort of assume that everyone is the same, like they've had the same experiences.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I went through this cycle of, I mean, I wouldn't say like forgetting like where I grew up and like the experiences that make me unique. But, you know, at uni, you're young, you want to fit in, you sort of standardize to what everyone is doing. And then over time, you realize that everyone else is also standardizing to this thing that it's actually not real for anyone.
It's called
Yeah.
the simulacrum in like postmodern philosophy. So it's like a copy of a copy of a copy where there's no original. Like it's just all copies. And at the end of the day, yeah, that really resonates. That was kind of my high school experience. I was like in a very, I was born in kind of a more of a like poor and like lower socioeconomic status city and environment. And I was accepted into like a very, very elitist high school, like the most elitist high school in Israel. And all of the people there had an insanely different life experience than me. Like I could count on like, it was like very small. We had like in every class, in every age group, there were like 80 students. And yeah, there were maybe 3 or 4 that had a similar life experience to me. And all the others were like, no, we have a ski vacation every year and we're like doing this. And it's kind of what you would expect in an elitist school. And yeah, I found myself when I like did the reconstructing and deconstructing of my figuring out like who I actually am, because I tried to be this thing that I thought I should be in this environment. And you know, you need to figure out who you are. And I actually found it very helpful to experience completely other perspectives and go live in other places in order to be able to really do that.
Yeah, I think that it was a somewhat similar experience. I went to law school in Australia and it was like 93% private schools. And I was like the international students from Venezuela, which was kind of crazy. Like, just to give you an example of how people's life experiences and like the lenses that they look things at shape their perception. They used to call me the Venezuelan prince because in their minds, they were like, these guys paying international fees up front. Like, we've got a shitload of money and we're paying with like HEX, which is a government finance program. And then I'd go to like their parties, like 21st birthday, giga houses with like tennis courts, pools. It was like crazy how much money. And just like the weirdest stories. They were like, oh yeah, my family is like first generation. Like, we're convicts, like proud. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, a lot of like really weird things that,
You know, was like the first day I remember it when I went. It's a boarding school, so you like bring all your stuff and you have like, and we were in rooms. We were like 2 Jewish students and 2 Arabs, like in the same room. We actually had a documentary film done about our room when I was like 16. And because like also maybe I can't say, but the other Jewish student he's a relative of a very well-known figure that you would also know their name, like very famous. And like there were the 2 Arab students with us. It was like, this was the whole thing. But the other guy, he unpacked his insane, like hi-fi sound system with like, back then there were CDs, like a 5 CD changer and like all, and he was like unpacking it. It was like all these like different things and like huge JBL like speakers. And he was like, this is my backup system, my real system, like the serious one is like in my room at home. And I was like, how much like does this thing cost? And he told me a figure which I calculated was like both my parents' salary for 5 months. Like that was the price of his backup. And then it was like, okay, I have no idea like this is out of my depth. I have no idea how to like deal with this environment. But yeah, it is. There are some crazy stories.
but then that leads to the quintessential question, like, are these experiences character building? Because I think, I mean, I wouldn't really change anything. Like, did I have a kind of like a weird growing up, unconventional? Yes. Am I like super wealthy and successful by default? No. But I think it's part of the journey. I've actually quite enjoyed, you know, that search. And, you know, I wonder, I guess you have a couple of years more on me. Do the people that start perhaps with less needs or less struggles or less perspective, are they equally successful? Are they equally happy? Because I'd say you're probably in the top there doing rewarding work, to say the least. And I think also success, depending how you measure it in terms of impact, money. Do other people like? Can you reach that without that special flavor of eating a bit of shit sometimes?
Yes.
I think, first of all, success is sometimes a bit misleading because when you get a head start, you can be successful. That doesn't mean that you're not, pardon me being blunt, mediocre, right? I do think that having less struggles creates more mediocrity. That, like, 100%, I believe that. And I think that, the fact that you see, it's much easier to succeed when you have like this head start and when, your father gives you like the $1 million for your first business, right? It's much easier to succeed, but you would still see a disproportionate share of the people who succeeded are people who did not start with that. And the reason there's a disproportionate share is because they are the excellent, right? Like the adversity creates excellence and comfort creates mediocrity. And that's not to say that, maybe it's nice to like be mediocre and comfortable. I don't know. Maybe it's better. This is just, I don't know, because this wasn't my experience. My experience was adversity that pushes you to excellence. So, but I definitely think that's a universal truth.
There's probably a matrix, and in some people, I think there's like wasted potential if they are too comfortable to start with, because nothing pushes them to really reach their maximum potential. And I could see that in Australia with a lot of people. Very smart, there's just nothing there to push them. And then there's people that, they may not be the brightest. And, even with adversity, they're just not going to do that much. So maybe just give them some money and they can enjoy life. Now, what I find interesting is that this happened like a very long time ago, but there was this guy, Andrew Hyde, I may be getting his name wrong because that long, he was an entrepreneur in residence for Victoria, the state where I lived in Australia. And we had this event. There was a lot of like a bit of a startup move back then. And they asked him about his impressions in Australia. I think he had been there for about 6 months. And his response was hilarious because it completely split the room for the exact same reason. He said, as an American, Australia is amazing. If I were to start a new business, a new startup, I would do it here because a lifestyle that everyday people have, you could work at a bar, like hourly wage. That lifestyle is what Americans aim for after they exit the startup. So he was like, this is perfect. Like I could just hustle here while already living decently. Every single Australian in the room was like, why the fuck would you hustle and have that risk and adversity if you already have the lifestyle? Like to them, it was like, you're actually crazy. Like, so it's, it's a little analogy that encapsulates the challenge of having everything, but also like you need stuff to do things.
I agree. By the way, I also think that's probably even more controversial, but I also think that if a social group has more power, then by default, they will be more mediocre. And I think that you always see the most interesting, I don't know, like if you look at art, for example, right? You would see the most interesting art coming from people who came from less privilege and not from people who come from more privilege. Like that's, you can just like, it's very, very universal and very clear.
Even artists that have a lot of resources pretend to be poor. There's a lot of those in Williamsburg and, in Berlin.
I live in Shoreditch, by the way. It's the same way as here.
Yeah, we have them in Australia. There's like Fitzroy, which is like hipster premium. And then there's Brunswick, which is like actual hipster, kind of broke. And then there's Footscray, which is like actual broke. Right next to each other.
Yeah.
But David, I don't want to get too deep into the personal stuff. We do have a lot to cover with IKA. But while we're on this topic, it reminds me of the book that I read, Sam must have been around 2016, 2017, The Startup Nation. It basically looked at Israel as a miracle case study. And there were a lot of things that stood out to me from that book, including that Israel is like actually super diverse, people from like 50 plus countries have congregated there, people mingling, doing military service, and just getting to know people from like every sector of society. The resilience, I think there was an analogy of like the Intel factory getting bombed or something and people still showing up to work and being proud to like output that to the world despite difficulties. I'm curious what your experience may have been along those lines, somewhere around like the innovation culture and resilience and The only reason why I ask is because in crypto, I see the same challenge of teams becoming mediocre because it's very easy to make money before you hit product market fit. And now that there's all this, it's very fashionable to suddenly be an American team. I think that it's interesting to tease out, okay, well, what makes what does American innovation look like? Some teams will tick that box, some teams don't, just by putting a flag there. And, similarly, what has the experience been of some teams that maybe inform that resilience, that outlook, maybe, yeah.
The numbers are obviously telling some sort of story. And I think there are different ways that you can explain those numbers. But if we go to the numbers 1 second, yeah, there's definitely a very high proportion of successful Israeli entrepreneurs, especially in areas that are very like deep tech. Cybersecurity is obvious, but there are a lot of other areas. I think AI is also becoming very prominent now in Israel, and even crypto now, by the way, is coming. We have all of the cryptographers in Israel, and they just did cybersecurity until now. Now a lot of them are kind of moving to Web3. So I think definitely there is something there. There's always a joke that if you meet like a random person in Tel Aviv, they're either a DJ or they have a startup. Like those are the two options. So this is fun.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I actually had Tel Aviv on my itinerary a couple of years ago. I had to change our plans.
Better wait months at least, but yeah, hopefully soon it'll be great.
Yeah.
So that's definitely the case, right? Now the kind of the reasoning or the explanation why that is, honestly, I don't know. There can be like a lot of different explanations. Some of them are positive and some of them might be negative. Like maybe this is like some of the positive effects of some of the negative things that are happening in Israel. In Israel, it is in a state of war. And I would say like for the majority of the time that it existed, sometimes it's like large scale all out war. Sometimes it's contained, but there's still always tension. There's always, it's not it's not Australia, right? Like that's for sure. And maybe as part of, adversity, you create excellence, but I'm not sure, as I said, right? Maybe it's better to be a bit more mediocre and a bit more comfortable because, I value human life and I value peace. And I think that's a goal in itself. So it's hard to say, what are the causes for this and whether it's good or not. But the reality is that you definitely have that. You have the entrepreneurial kind of drive, and you do have a lot of bright people that are pushed to their maximum or want to create value, want to create impact, want to be successful, but not like successful in just like making money, successful in like, making a dent in this world. And I think this is a drive that you can see in Israel more than in a lot of other places. I think there are some similarities to American ambition, but I think American ambition is much more results driven. And I think maybe in Israel, it's a lot more impact / reputation. I think it's kind of when I'm thinking about it now, it's like a mixture of what drives maybe Americans and what drives maybe more Europeans. It's kind of something in the middle and maybe actually quite a good balance.
Well, I'm sure you know that Israel and Australia are the only technically non-European countries that participate in Eurovision. A mystery for everyone to ponder.
Australia is pretty insane, I have to say, but I guess it's because it's English speaking, or I don't know. It's weird.
Look, Australia is, there's an existential crisis. Like, it does feel like it is slightly misplaced on the map, but it is culturally very close to Europe, both, the British legacy, but like most of the migrants, and there is some migrants as well. I think that I don't know exactly which argument they made to be allowed into Eurovision. That is strange, but I can sort of see it. I mean, we ignore the map for a little bit.
Cool. Yeah, it's just like even the trip is just insane. But anyway, yeah.
The reason why I ask is because I think it's interesting that regardless of where the crypto progress comes from, I mean, you can make the case for any software really, this open source software. it becomes available to the entire world, and you could make the argument that it advances the entire world. So once again, like, it's good to see the US going pro crypto. Although the interesting thing is that when the US was anti-crypto, it had an impact on the entire world by the reach of their institutions, etc. But if we look at before that, I was very closely following the regions that were advancing crypto out of necessity. If you look at Argentina, El Salvador, different countries that may be, just driven to do it. Even if you pass a law, maybe harder to raise money now because I don't have a bank account. Fuck it, we're gonna do it anyway. Like, we need this kind of thing. So even in that sense, it's interesting to see Israel enter that crypto world, maybe similar to what we started talking about. They're frying very big fish when we talk about like cybersecurity and stuff. Crypto, I would imagine, is a much smaller market for now. But I'm curious if there is like a vision for crypto on how advancing this decentralized technology could have that positive impact in the country, in the world, like solve some issues. For instance, South America is very like economy centric, inflation, get rid of like corrupt governments and middlemen. I wonder if there's like any flavor of that crypto that may be present in the Israel startup ecosystem or personally.
I think people look at Web3 in general, and honestly, that's the correct way technically to look at it, as like a subsection of cybersecurity. Because if you're looking at crypto tech, and again, try and like ignore meme coins, and like if you're looking at the actual tech, that tech is cybersecurity tech because it is a way to do things that satisfy specific security requirements. So those security requirements can be, for example, distribution across multiple nodes. It can be cryptographic guarantees that who can and can't attest to a certain thing, guarantees around liveness, guarantees around availability. This is the cybersecurity sector, Web3. So for a lot of different historical reasons, this was never like conceived or perceived as like a cybersecurity category, but it is in fact a cybersecurity category. And when we look at a lot of Web3 projects in Israel, they're around like ZK and FHE, MPC, right? The type of cryptographic primitives that are already used in a lot of cybersecurity contexts, but now can be used in this cybersecurity context, this cybersecurity Web3. So I think this is kind of the way that people think about it. And in terms of, being able to build things that are very resilient to attacks, this is something that my co-founder, Jonathan, this is what he did in his service. And there are a lot of like expertise, both on the theoretical side. So academia, a lot of the top cryptographers in the world come from Israel, and also like practically, like the practical cybersecurity experts and defensive cybersecurity and cryptography experts are also like building these type of very resilient systems. So I think this is kind of the angle that drives the crypto innovation in Israel. It's less the economic side, it's more the cybersecurity side.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, when you start looking at like the theory behind it, it's actually really deep. I saw from the outside of the room a ZK workshop they were giving in Argentina. I was there in December, and it's so intense. It really made me appreciate that, when you look at the crypto circus and all the different performers and other people in the audience as well, trading shit coins, it made me appreciate that there's many teams at different levels of depth. And as I said, like one technical breakthrough from a team implemented in a protocol in a blockchain can become used by millions and open the door for millions. So this is a great place to start. The cybersecurity guarantees. There's a couple of things as we start to unpack IKA. The first one is maybe it could be a good place to jump off. You mentioned recently on your Twitter a tweet from Vitalik that the future is going to be multi-chain, but not cross-chain. Could we use that analogy to try to understand what are, like pre-IKA? What were some of the challenges? What were some of the ways that we were doing that cross-chain thing, and why it can't realistically scale into the future as we get more wider adoption?
Sure. Let's go back to like what is a blockchain and what does it guarantee you as a user? So the basic thing about a blockchain, and this is, by the way, something that a lot of people, even people that are quite technical and are involved in Web3 for a while, it's something that a lot of people don't understand. When you look at the state of the blockchain, you don't need to believe the validators. What you can do, and that's like the whole concept of a blockchain, right? It's a chain of blocks. You can reconstruct the state from Genesis using, the hashes of the blocks and verifying that every single transaction that was included was signed with a legitimate, valid signature by the owner of the private key that holds that account. And this is like the most basic thing of a blockchain. It literally gave it its name, is the ability, and we call it zero trust security, to not have to trust anyone and be able to verify everything. That is like one of the most basic. And if someone tries to include a signature, spending your coins without your actual signature, the private key holder, then you would be able to recognize it immediately as you're reconstructing the state and just remove it. You can't fake it. Like, that's the most amazing. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was thinking of an analogy to try to explain this. It was more so in the context of like a spy. Like, let's say hypothetically, we create a fake birth certificate. Oh, sure. You were born in 1965 and your name is Ricardo. And I was thinking that analogy between a blockchain and like birth certificate and like humans, like DNA. It's like, well, actually, you can have someone's DNA as a block header. Like, for you to exist, we can actually trace, okay, well, these were your two parents and their two parents. You can't manifest a new person from 1960 because it must have come from someone. Like, you can't physically travel back in time or like change someone's parents. I guess that soon we will be able to clone someone, but even then, we can still see who the original one was, and there's still like lineage there. So,
yeah. And by the
would that
way,
be?
and the reason it's hard to find an analogy is because this is the magic of cryptography. The reason you can't create a signature that is, without the private key is because this is the concept of public key cryptography, is that this is exactly something that you can't do. And it's hard to find a parable for that, because this is why you had to invent cryptography in order to be able to create this type of guarantee. So this is like the most basic guarantee that you have. And the reason, by the way, you need to have that, and that's like, if we go back to Bitcoin, is to solve the double spending problem, right? So when Bitcoin started, we already had signatures existed. So I could prove that I signed something over to you. But in order for you to know that I haven't signed that to someone else as well, we need to have a third party managing a ledger. And then we're back to like trusting someone. So you needed to build this blockchain, this new concept where you don't need to trust anyone. And it doesn't matter. And you want to have as many people managing that ledger, but it doesn't matter, because even if all of them agree to try and fake something, they can't, because you can always verify all of the state from Genesis until today. So this is the basic guarantee. And the misconception that people have is that, if the validators or the miners decide to change the state, they can't do it. That's the whole concept of a blockchain, is that you do not need to trust anyone, not even the network operators. So that is the basic guarantee. And that worked great with Bitcoin. And then you started to have, more networks. At the beginning, it was like Bitcoin forks and trying to like create, kind of nuanced or variant use cases, out of Bitcoin. And then you had Ethereum and smart contracts came along. And then you had more smart contract platforms, and you started to have like all these different networks, and people wanted to operate between different networks. But the problem you have when you do that is someone needs to attest to whatever is on the other network. And you can't, as a user, reconstruct everything when you have something that comes from a different environment. You can think about it like a silo. When I'm inside the silo, I can reconstruct everything and everything has to match. But now there's something from outside. So someone needs to tell me that that's the truth. And that someone can be, a bridge, a third party. It can be that's a decentralized bridge. It's like the validators of the other chain will tell me what is the state. But then they can cheat because now we lose that guarantee that I can reconstruct the state. They can just cheat and attest to a different state on their network. However, I try to solve this, because the user is not part of the process, the user is removed. When you're in a single network, the user is always part of the process. A signature cannot be generated without the user. The moment you operate between networks, the user is not part of the process. And now the user doesn't have that very, very fundamental guarantee. And if you zoom out, the moment in cybersecurity, the moment you break like a tiny, tiny, tiny thing, everything is broken. So when you zoom out, you can see that the vast majority of hacks in crypto happened in bridges. And everyone is like, why? Oh, bridges suck. They don't have good enough security. No, the reason is the fundamental kind of security guarantee that you have in blockchain is broken there. So obviously it will lead eventually to a lot of different ways where money is drained. So this is the problem that we have in crypto. And this was the problem that we wanted to solve. We called it initially the sovereignty problem because, when you're in a sovereign kind of zone of sovereignty, like your own blockchain, everything is great. But the moment you want to operate across different zones of sovereignty, you start to have this problem. We had a few different names, but this is essentially the problem that no one was able to solve. And we realized we needed to create new cryptography in order to solve.
Yeah, there's a lot to take in. I had another analogy around you are at a party and there's a party next door and you want to know if the party next door is good because yours is whatever. But you can't hear the music next door. Somebody tells you what the music is. That person in the middle could be lying to you and sending you to a shit party. So, there's obviously there's a lot more nuance there, but I think that you touched on like the key element of the user being part of it because it has to sign. So maybe, we can start to, we're warming up.
Warming up, yeah.
I note with great interest that, I guess, first there's 3 categories. There's bridges, there's cross-messaging, and then there's NPCs. With bridges, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have to spend too much time on this. The bridge basically holds the assets and then issues them somewhere else. So the trust is that the person holding the asset and issuing it elsewhere is not compromised. Cross-messaging, I'm not entirely sure how it works, but there's layer 0, Axler, there's a few there, CCTB. And then with MPC, I know that IKA is not the first one. I think Torchain, ICP, there's a few players there. So yeah, maybe we can just briefly run through the...
bridges, that's exactly right? There's a third party. Sometimes it's a multi-sig, sometimes it's a centralized custodian. I think the biggest, most well-known bridge is WBTC. And essentially there's an address that's controlled by that third party bridge. And you deposit assets into that address. And then that third party issues a derivative, a wrapped version of that token on another blockchain. Cross-chain messaging is very, very similar to that. It's less flexible because it has to operate only on smart contract networks. So you can't have like Bitcoin cross-chain messaging or anything like that. But essentially, instead of having like a centralized custodian that like receives the assets and then issues, you have a network that signs a message. So that's the reason it can only operate on smart contract networks is I have a smart contract net on Ethereum. You deposit money to that smart contract. Now I have a network of, for example, in Wormhole, they're called guardians. They're like every cross-chain messaging has like a different name. And those guardians sign a message saying, there's this amount in the smart contract on Ethereum, right? They take that signed message and they submit it to the smart contract on Solana. Now the smart contract on Solana will issue the derivative, the wrap token. So it's like taking the bridge model and putting in the middle some sort of signing committee to like attest to the state. But again, as I said, the user is not part of it. So let's say that network is compromised or is colluding or anything like that. They can sign whatever they want. And by the way, that happened with the Wormhole hack. In the Wormhole hack, you had $300-something million of ETH that were withdrawn, which was based on the fact that it needs to have an attestation. And if you have the attestation, and there was some sort of vulnerability there that allowed someone to just mint endless wrapped ETH on Solana and then transfer them. And by the way, this is the most interesting part, and this is going back to what Vitalik said, that allows you to actually steal Ethereum on Ethereum if you find something that is broken on Solana, right? If you break the bridge on Solana, you are able to steal ETH from Ethereum, which is something you're not supposed to be able to do. So in Ethereum, like no one is supposed to be able to spend my ETH besides me. But now I give it to the smart contract. The smart contract has its own rules. And now I can steal real Ethereum by breaking Solana. And that's like the big problem that Vitalik has with bridges. And that's why he said the world can never be cross-chain. It will be multi-chain. There will be multiple chains, but it can't be cross-chain because that is a fundamental flaw in blockchain security, that you can break a security of one blockchain and steal assets on another.
And I guess that technically there's actually like a two-tier vector of attack. Not only do you have the bridge between two blockchains, but if the second blockchain is itself not secure, like you could have a perfectly secure bridge, but if the other blockchain is centralized or very poorly managed, whatever.
Yeah, Vitalik's point is it's always the weaker blockchain security determines the security of it. But it's more than that, because if you break a weak blockchain security, you still can't steal the assets of that blockchain, because that's the whole concept of a blockchain, that even if I am able to take over all of the validators, I am not able to steal assets. But if I am able, like the main incentive now to break the security or to take over a blockchain is to take the bridged assets on another blockchain. That's the main incentive today. So it really reduces it incentivizes attacks. It creates honeypots, incentivizes attacks, and reduces the overall security of blockchain in general, which is why Vitalik was right. Like cross-chain, this cannot be the future. Like this doesn't create a sustainable future.
Okay, so bridges, bad. If you were to guess over the next 5 years, are the bridge usage and reliance just going to disappear, or?
So the short answer is yes. And I can hopefully paint the picture of how I see the future very soon.
Yeah.
But,
so let's enter into the era of MPCs, multi-party computation.
Yeah.
First, a really quick summary of what it is and how it works. And then maybe we can start unpacking what makes IKA's MPC unique. And then we can see where Sui enters the picture. Great t-shirt, by the way.
Yeah. Actually, I didn't remember I was wearing the t-shirt, but now I saw it on the video. I'm like, okay, that's good. I should have had an IKA t-shirt, but it's okay. Let's give the credit to Sui.
You can edit a little octopus on you while I edit afterwards.
I have like a kind of clear land here for an octopus.
Just like that, yeah.
Yeah. So MPC. MPC stands for multi-party computation. MPC in general, it's a field in cryptography, and it's a very broad field. And essentially, the thing that MPC is dealing with is how do we do something together, a few different parties, right? Computation, perform a computation, do something together without revealing secret information, right? The very, very basic example that is used in order to explain what is MPC in general is, let's say there are a bunch of people, they all want to know if they're making, more or less of the average in the group, but they don't want to reveal their salary, right? So how do we know, if I'm making more or less than like the average of the people around me without revealing my salary? And then you can build an MPC algorithm that allows you to perform a computation together. It's essentially usually based on rounds of communication. So every time I am communicating some unintelligible data, right? And you're taking the data and doing something and communicating it, and then there are different assumptions. Are we hostile to each other? Are we not? Are we going to cheat? Are we not going to cheat? There's all these assumptions around it. But at the end of all these round of communications and sharing information that no one can understand from that information anything about the secret information, we eventually get a number, or we get a result in this scenario of I make more than the average or I make less than the average. So this is the most basic example to explain what it is. But MPC is a very broad field, and it is used to do a lot of different things, especially in cybersecurity, of how to do things with multiple parties. Sometimes it's distrust between parties, but sometimes it's just I have secret information that I don't want to share, but I still want to do something together with someone else that also has secret information. So
It's a lot better than the quintessential, I'll show you yours and you show,
yeah,
I'll show you mine and you show me yours.
exactly. By the way, is that all of these things in cryptography were historically developed from very like theoretical, weird kind of questions like, oh, I want to know what you make and you want to know what I make, but how could, and then people started like build these MPC algorithms and then started to make them more generic. And then at the end of the day, they have like real world applications that are super important in a lot of different industries, but like crypto also will explain soon how. But it all starts with like some things that you're like, why is anyone even like spending their time and effort researching this thing in math? They're so smart. Why don't do something that will actually benefit the world? But eventually it becomes something super complex.
I actually went down a crazy rabbit hole because from some of the resources you sent me, I saw that one of your team members, I'm not going to try to pronounce his name, he won Brakersky.
Yeah, Zvika Brokersky is his name, yeah.
Yeah, he won the Godel Prize, and I was like, I'm curious, what is that? I asked DeepSeek, and it gave me the wrong winners from that year. And I started going down a rabbit hole, and I was like, either DeepSeek or David are lying to me. Would you believe the fucking Chinese in the Chinese Wikipedia, they just put somebody else there. And I don't think they're even Chinese. They're just, I don't know. There's something to it. But I did spend some time looking at the list of alleged winners for the prize, and it's fascinating. It's like all this game theory and just like cryptography and trying to figure out things. Now, this definition of MPC, it's a lot more rich and complex than my previous understanding of you simply splitting a private key between multiple people and them signing. So I'm curious, but now this.
So this is how it connects, right? So, and there is a reason why I started with like the very broad definition. So MPC, that's the big category, the big field. Inside MPC, there's something called TSS, Threshold Signature Scheme, which is a subset of the MPC field. And it is MPC algorithms that allow you, so in public key cryptography, you create a secret, a private key, then you derive a public key out of this private key. So no one knows the private key and no one can reverse engineer your private key from the public key, but you can use the private key in order to sign messages, and those messages will be able to be verified against the public key. So you share the public key publicly, you never share the private key. You use the private key to generate signatures, and people can verify that you own the private key because they can verify it against the public key. And that is used, by the way, everyone in the world uses that like a bajillion times a day because that's how the internet works. Everything on the internet is done with like signing messages and SSL certificates and HTTPS, like all of that, it works on public key cryptography because that's the only way to verify things without sharing secret information. So that's public key cryptography. Now with TSS, Threshold Signature Scheme, as the name alludes, you take the signature and you create a threshold that generates that signature. So what you do, instead of having, there are a few ways to do that. One way is starting with an existing private key and just breaking it up into a few different parts. And then, different people take parts and then, you have a threshold, let's say 3 out of 5 can generate a signature. But the more interesting way of doing a TSS is what is called DKG, distributed key generation, which means a private key never exists. So unlike a usual blockchain account where you start with a private key, you derive a public key out of that. That is where your account number, for example, comes from. A private key never exists. What happens is you have a ceremony between different parties that come together, and those parties create a public key together. So every party has their own secret share, it's called. They have their own secret information. And they never share it, but they do this ceremony, this process together. And at the end of the ceremony, you have a public key that is indistinguishable from a public key that was created from a private key, but there's no private key in existence. So what you do is now you have this threshold of secret shares that can generate a valid signature to this private key, the same way you would be able to do with a private key, but there was never a private key. And that opens up a lot of very interesting options of what you can do with that. And that is the starting point of MPC in blockchain, in Web3. So yeah, if you have any questions.
That is crazy shit.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it does sound a lot like a Horcrux, like the best way to secure your soul, I guess, lose your soul, but live forever kind of thing, is to split it in many different chunks, embedded into secret things.
The Horcrux example is akin to like the first way. It's called, by the way, Shamir secret sharing. So you take an existing soul and you break it into pieces, right? I think the more interesting one is, what if the soul never existed in the first place and you start with the pieces, right? That's the more interesting kind of cool way. And it also allows you to, we talked about security guarantees and things like that. It allows you a lot more interesting options around that.
Wow, that's fascinating. The only real question that I had, even though the Horcrux one was pretty good, MPC, at least the broader definition, I can't help but notice there is like some similarities or some relationship and some of your team's background as well with like FHE, like fully homomorphic encryption, ZK. How would those different fields, perhaps the latter are more known to people or they're sexier? How do they relate or differentiate from MPC?
So one of our researchers, he's not a researcher anymore. He used to be, his name is Avishai Yanai. He's a PhD in cryptography. He actually has his own company now, and he does things around garbled circuits, which is another type of MPC for privacy. Soda Labs, that's the name of his company. But he used to say that people usually forget that MPC is a type of a cryptographic problem. Remember, we said the problem is I want to do something where I don't want to share secret information, and I want to do that with other parties. That's multi-party computation. And ZK, FHE, and TSS, threshold signature schemes, those are different ways or like ZK and FHE are different answers to that problem. So, for example, a way to perform a computation where I want to prove that I have something, but I don't want to share what I have, that's ZK. So that is a way of doing a multi-party computation without sharing secret information. FHE, the same. FHE is fully homomorphic encryption, and it allows you to run computations on encrypted data. So I can send data to you. You can run your AI, like private AI model that you don't want me to know. You run the computation on the encrypted data, so you don't know my data. You give me back the results. I can decrypt it, and I got it after a computation. But at the end of the day, it's also a way to do MPC. So MPC is like a very broad concept that encapsulates any type of cryptographic solution to be able to do something without sharing secret information. If we're talking about blockchain use cases, ZK is mostly used to do kind of, let's call it client-side proofs. Like I want to prove that I did something or are doing something in the right way, and I don't want to share exactly what I'm doing. So it's like client-side privacy. FHE is more for like shared state. So I want to have like privacy on a shared state, and I want multiple parties to do something together. So I use FHE. But at the end of the day, all of these things are all just a part of the broader MPC field.
I get it. So would it be right to say that technically MPC are just like the parties running the computation, and you can just solve different problems in different ways depending on what the situation is? Or
yeah. So with MPC, like the way that when people say MPC in Web3, they mean generating a signature without having a private key. And the problem here, the cryptographic problem, is how do I generate a valid signature without sharing secret information with multiple parties? And the solution is there are different MPC algorithms, like TSS algorithms, that are used in order to solve that. And we created one of them, which I believe is the most robust and also the most interesting one. But there are a lot of different algorithms that are used in different contexts in order to solve that problem.
That's good. We're making good progress.
Inch by inch.
Some of the existing algorithms or the existing use cases of MPC, what were some of the challenges, like the capacity, their cost, like where did you guys see? Because the way that I see it, like on the timeline, you have Bitcoin, one blockchain, a ledger, then you have Ethereum, separate blockchain, but they do world compute. A lot of things are not a problem until they become a problem. the cross-chain world, it's not really an issue until we have something like Solana, perhaps Sui, like the world where multiple layer ones succeed simultaneously was not widely accepted till recently. And some would argue there's not that much demand on any of these blockchains, and there's really not much demand at all for the cross-chain world. But as we continue to map things out, 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, it becomes clear which parts are going to break. So we already have the scalability side, breaking on Ethereum. Now we have multiple competing ecosystems to fulfill the scalability. And now the issue is, well, how did this communicate? Because we want it to be like one large pipe. Where would you say that MPC, assuming that's like the third generation of the communication as well, first being bridges, second being messaging, what are the current challenges of MPC, and what does IKA bring to the table with that novel algorithm?
Sure. So it might surprise you that I actually don't see MPC as like the third generation of like this evolution. I think MPC right now is the best way to solve this, but not with the algorithms that existed before which is why we had to create a new algorithm. But I also think that that's not the end game at all. And we are working on our long-term plan of bringing in more kind of modern cryptography primitives that are currently purely theoretical, but we believe will solve the problem with zero compromises. Right now, MPC can get it with like, minimal compromises, but zero compromises is, more in the 5 to 10 year horizon. And we're working on those things in parallel. Like we're still doing cryptography research, and we believe we'll also find those solutions. So right now, MPC is just the best way to do that. And maybe if I explain a bit how MPC evolved in Web3, it'll be clear why that happened. So as kind of Bitcoin especially, but also other cryptocurrencies started to gain attention and kind of, early institutional adoption, you started to get people and value grew. You started to get people and institutions and companies that are holding a lot of value in digital assets. And digital asset management, custody, is a huge, huge problem. It's, it's not a bug, it's a feature, right? Self-custody. But that creates a lot of issues for, a company or an institution that wants to hold it. That need was identified by the team that created Fireblocks quite a few years ago. And Fireblocks was the first like major implementation of MPC and TSS, the threshold signature scheme. You had digital asset custodians, but they were like completely centralized custodians. Like, I manage everything for you and you need to trust me. And what Fireblocks said is, let's take this, it was very, very new. Like the first TSS algorithm for ECDSA was developed in 2016 by Lindell, an Israeli cryptographer. He's now, by the way, his company was purchased by Coinbase. So he's like their MPC tech is behind Coinbase Wallet. So he created the first two-party computation, which is just two parties that can create a signature together I think it was 2016. And then you had a few more different algorithms, different iterations, different versions with different capabilities. But Fireblocks took that and said, let's take MPC and let's go and offer that as a product for custody. So we are actually not a custodian because we never hold the full key and the full assets, right? You hold part of it, so you don't need to trust us. And we hold the other part so we can enforce access control. And this is like the major thing that you need as a company, as an institution, is to have access control, because you can't have the key in someone's drawer because he or anyone in the company can like take it and then take all the money and there are no controls. But if all they have there is a share, so they can't generate a signature, they need Fireblocks to sign off as well. And Fireblocks operate as a service that offers different access control mechanisms, like a video chat or two-factor authentication or whatever you have in any banking app. And they kind of identified this really novel use case of threshold signatures and how to implement them for custody use cases. So this is how it happened. And once Fireblocks did that, it became insanely successful, very, very fast. And that also drove a lot of cryptography researchers to create better threshold schemes. And actually, one of the best ones was developed with both the founder of Arbitrum, Stephen Goldfeder, and the contributors from the Fireblocks team who added like some contributions. And this was considered like the state of the art of like MPC signatures before we developed our protocol. As you can imagine, all of these algorithms were developed for centralized custodians. Okay. I am a custodian. I hold one share. You hold another share. Maybe there are 3 shares. Maybe there's a trusted third party that holds another share. There's all these models, but it's all very clear, and it's all designed for centralized custodians. So, for example, no one cares about supporting like 1,000 shares because you don't need 1,000 shares. You need 2, 3, 5 shares. Like that's the maximum.
Because in this case, the assumption is that the person that is involved with setting it up, like let's say it's my assets, I pick the custodians. I am one, Fireblocks is one, and if I get my mom, like you know what the security assumptions are when you set it up. So as long as it is split 2, 3, 4 way, you remove a lot of the challenges of,
that was the
not knowing what the
right? That was the use case. That was the problem that needed to be solved. And then the algorithm was designed to solve that problem. And then what happened is that smart people in Web3 said, MPC is pretty cool, right? MPC allows you to generate a signature to any network. It's very generic. It's like an ECDSA signature or an EDDSA or Schnorr signature, super generic. I can generate a signature to any network I want. What if I took that and I spread the shares between validators, right? Now I can create an MPC network and no one has the private key, but you have a threshold of validators and they join together and they generate the signature. That's a super cool idea, a super cool concept. The problem here is there are a few problems. So let's start with the problems. One problem is, as I said, these algorithms were designed for a centralized use case. So the moment you started adding more and more parties, it became more and more unusable. So that we won't get into all the technical stuff, but it became very, very slow. The throughput, the throughput that you can support became very, very low. And so, some scaled it like to 20, 25, but most stayed under 10. And under 10 is not super decentralized. Like if you have 4 nodes, 8 nodes running MPC, not super decentralized. The other very, very big problem was the structure. So the structure in a centralized use case, you say, okay, I have a few parties. I have a threshold T out of N, right? T is the threshold, N is the number of parties. So let's say I have 5 parties. My threshold is 3. I have 3 out of 5. That makes sense. Like that's exactly the use case. But then when you're in a centralized use case, the user is one of those parties. And if the user, for example, wants to make sure that nothing can be signed without them, then they set the threshold. Let's say they keep 2 shares and the threshold is 4 out of 5, right? Now, nothing can be signed without them because they have 2 shares and no one can sign without them. That makes sense. What happens when it's a network, right? In a network, nodes are supposed to be able to join and leave. You can't have the user as part of the network because every user would need to have a distributed key with all the validators. And every time a validator joins or leaves, they would need to be online with all of the users in order to reshare the keys. So the MPC would still work. And it's just, it doesn't work. So you have to remove the user from the process. And now you only have the T out of N, the threshold, only includes the nodes of the network. So you still remove the zero trust guarantee, right? The basic guarantee of a blockchain that the user is involved. And you have a problem to scale. So it's both not very decentralized and you don't have the user involved. So MPC networks actually, they were supposed to be a step forward, but it was actually a bit of a step back from the original use of MPC, which was in centralized custodian.
So just to make sure that I'm following, when we limit it to like say 8 to 10 validators, it becomes centralized not only because of the number of validators, but I'm guessing that these parties also have to be, I guess, like whitelisted or chosen by someone. So you can't just let anyone join, right?
So that's the other part. If the user is not part of the process, right, and you have a small number of parties, of course you would have a permission network, because if it's permissionless, then if there are enough assets there, someone will pay enough to be part of the network and then steal the assets. Like you can't. This is like a big problem.
Which was my next question. And this was when it made it clear for me a few months ago, speaking with our friend in common, third Illuminati. I was like, yeah, but the user has to sign a transaction to initiate the validators. And he's like, yeah, that's when things are working properly. But technically, there's nothing stopping the validators from coding themselves and starting a transaction. And I was like, oh shit. When you look at it that way, you understand, okay, well, fuck it, centralize it, whitelisted, whatever it takes for me to trust their validators. But once again, like I always try to project things 6 months, 2 years, 6 years into the future. Like, how much value can that realistically hold until it just becomes unworkable? Like, I know people now that don't trust busy networks of the network that they're working. They're like, fuck it, I'm not putting my money in there. So,
But yeah, but more than that, it's not just, let's say you trust all of the parties there, right? Let's say you think they're really great. What if they were hacked? What if the value there is so big that it creates an insane incentive for all the Lazarus groups of the world to try and get access to them? We published a vulnerability where we were able to get access to over 1% of Ethereum staked by using Web 2 vulnerabilities. It wasn't even Web 3 vulnerabilities. We were able to, leak the keys out of over 10,000 Ethereum validators. So,
did you get a bounty?
This is a long story. That's for a different conversation. But the important thing is that we were able to report it to the right people and we were able to fix it. But what I'm saying is that these things, are become like a target the moment there's enough value there. And if you have a honeypot where if I am able to break through somehow, I will be able to steal the money, then eventually someone will find a way. And that's always the assumption that you need to have in cybersecurity, is that nothing is 100% secure. And so math is the only thing you can really rely on. So if I can make something that can, and this is why blockchain is so successful, because at the end of the day, if I want to steal someone's money, I need to get into their wallet. And sometimes people are able to do that, but you are the only one who is responsible of safeguarding your wallet. It's not like a system that can be vulnerable. So I need to hack every single individual person in order to steal their assets.
That's why I like the old school, like back in the day, 2016, when I had exactly $0 to my name. I remember going to my ETH wallet and printing out my cold wallet seed phrase and then sending assets to it. Like, that's how the old school people did it. That was the mentality going into it. Clearly doesn't scale, but it sort of goes to show like the incredible power. Obviously, those wallets are long gone, but I would hide the private keys in like my mom's house in book. No, I was like, no one's finding this.
Like, honestly, it's like the beginning of the internet. It's like magical, but it's not really like that doesn't scale. But I do think that a lot of what we're offering gives you the same or very close security guarantees to that, but allows scaling and allows mass adoption. And maybe now is a good place to go into what we created and why it's a game changer.
It is 100% the place. How does IKA approach these novel problems around trust and scalability?
When we started, we obviously looked at everything that existed, and we realized that nothing that exists kind of fill all of our requirements. And our requirements, we had a lot of requirements. Actually, most cryptographers we talked to told us, like, you just can't do that. So, maybe find something else to work with. But we hired the ones that wanted the challenge. So eventually we were able to. But yeah, sorry.
What were those requirements? And out of curiosity, like, was it hard to hire that type of talent? Because we talked about it before, like usually those people are busy doing something else.
Yeah, I mean, we have a pretty extensive network, and I think we're able to get people excited about a tough problem to solve. And the requirements were, if we're boiling it down, obviously there was a long list of requirements, but boiling it down, it's the speed, so latency. It's the scalability, so throughput, let's call it, right? The capacity. It was decentralization, so the ability to have a lot of parties involved. And the last one was zero trust, so which was the toughest one of all, which is making sure the user is always part of the process of the signature generation. And nothing got even close to filling any of those requirements with the existing solutions. And again, they were designed for custody, which doesn't require speed or scalability. It was designed for centralized custody, which doesn't require decentralization. And zero trust there only worked when you had a few parties and not in a network. So we had to create our own cryptography in order to solve that. And we went through a lot of different designs until we were able to find something that works. And it took us almost 2 years to actually finish the entire research. And our algorithm that we created, it's called 2PC MPC. And 2PC MPC, as the name may suggest, is a two-party computation. So you can think about it as like the first level is a two-party computation. There's the user on one side and the network on the other side, and both of them can generate a signature. So you have the zero trust guarantee because nothing can happen without the user. But the network itself is not one party. It's like a nested MPC where there's a multi-party computation between all of the validators of the network. So you can think about it like two tiers of MPC. And we are using some, I won't go into like the technicalities, but kind of clever homomorphic encryption techniques that allow us, we talked about homomorphic encryption, which is running computation on encrypted data. So what we do is we actually encrypt all of the network shares of these Dwallets, the signing mechanism that we created. So every Dwallet has a user share and a network share. That's a two-party computation. And the network shares are encrypted and are operated in an MPC way, in a threshold way between all of the validators. And there were a lot of breakthroughs that we needed to have. First of all, enabling that structure that creates zero trust, but also making it super scalable, being able to scale both in terms of the throughput, the capacity, but also the terms of the number of parties, and also make it super fast. And on top of all of that, after we were able to do the actual research and make the algorithm, we needed to find a network that could still be fast and run the MPC as part of the network, because we needed to have the guarantees, security guarantees that you have in a blockchain, that the signers put up stake and they're part of like a system where there's also economic security on top of the cryptographic security. So on top of all of doing all of the research work, we also needed to connect it to a network consensus that will allow us to run in the way that we want it to. So those were kind of the challenges, and that's the algorithm that we created, and we can go into how it connects to IKA and how that works. That's the high level stuff.
I have so many questions. This is very exciting. The first one is the algorithm open sourced or closed sourced? Second one, I also heard you reference Dwallet. I recall that was the previous name or the previous name. So maybe a bit of like, why has the project evolved, or what has changed? And then the third one, we can start talking about that network. And I think that's when IKA and Story may cross paths. But yeah, we can take it one at a time, or in any order that you want.
So first of all, we already published the first version of 2PC MPC. We're now going to publish the second version, and we're publishing them as cryptography research papers. So, it's not just like, usually when people do stuff in crypto, it's mostly like code implementation. With us, it's the actual cryptography research papers. We submitted those papers to like cryptography conferences. It's, that we have like PhDs that are, write these kind of papers. So it's real academic stuff. All of like the security proofs and the mathematical proofs are all written there. And the first version is already public on ePrint, which is where people publish cryptography papers. And the second one will be public very soon. So that's in terms of the protocol, the algorithm itself. In terms of,
and just to clarify, does it mean that technically anyone can access those papers, and with the information there, they would be able to build a similar solution or their own network? Or how does it translate from the academic realm into what IKA is today?
So we do have, you asked about Dwallet. So Dwallet Labs is the name of the company, and Dwallet is the name of the primitive that 2PC MPC enables. And we do have some IP protection around some of the concept, especially as they relate to crypto. So all of the code that we published it under open source it's similar to Zama, if you're familiar. So open source that doesn't give rights to any IP protection, underlying patents or anything like that. The reason we did that is mostly so we can have a head start. I think that we created a lot of very, very novel stuff, and we're very underfunded if we're compared to other ecosystems in this space. And we wanted to make sure that we have at least, a few years of a head start before people can start using our tech. It's definitely our intention to completely open source everything, including our patents, but we wanted to make sure that we're not ripped off on day one and someone else just takes everything we built and pours a lot more money into it than what we have.
Which makes sense. I think that's a sensible thing to do. I would have done the same. So to clarify, it's open source, I guess, mostly from a security perspective, like people can audit the code, but there are some commercial protections there that prevents people from using it for their own.
Exactly. And the research itself is completely open. You can, we have on anything non-commercial. We don't have any restrictions. So we also wanted to contribute to the state of the art of cryptography in general. So that was very important.
Another Godzilla prize coming up.
Hopefully, yeah. A lot of our cryptographers are gunning for some of those prizes for sure. So yeah, that's also a topic for another conversation. So it's a whole other world. But yeah, so that's Dwallet Labs, and Dwallet is the name of the primitive. We used to call it Dwallet Network, and people just thought it was like a wallet app. So we had to change the name, but the Dwallet is actually the name of the primitive. The way we structured it for like the developer, the end developer, is they can use this primitive, this Dwallet. It's like a signing mechanism that utilizes 2PC MPC. That's like the MPC algorithm it uses in the background. But essentially, they can use it inside their smart contract, and you can think about it like an object that can sign transactions to other networks. You can create policies around that object. So it's like a very easy way for a developer to encapsulate the value that 2PC MPC creates, and it's just giving it a name, right? So the name is Dwallet. And when I say Dwallet, I mean this primitive, this building block that now someone can use within their smart contract.
I noticed that you used the word object. I know that moved language is very object-centric. So I'm wondering whether it's just an easy way to place it within that world, or whether, it applies generally to any smart contract or any developer mindset.
That's actually, it's a good segue into Sui. So first of all, it's not just Move, it's specifically Sui Move. So the Sui variant of Move is based on an object data model. And one of the reasons, when we started, we had like these two huge problems. One was the MPC algorithm. The other was the network that will implement that MPC algorithm. And we said, okay, let's deal with that. With the MPC algorithm, it's a huge problem. We'll figure that out, and then we'll move to the network part. And luckily, while we were doing the MPC algorithm part, the Sui guys were solving the network part. So it wasn't live when we started, but as we were working on it, they started publishing things, and we were very impressed with Sui for a lot of reasons. Move and the object model is one of them. It's actually very intuitive to work through objects and capabilities. Like it's basically like how access control works in modern programming languages. And it also is how you would imagine a design for Dwallets, because you create an access control structure around this object. And if it's actually an object in the programming language and how the network is constructed, that makes it like a lot easier and a lot more intuitive, and also a lot more secure. So we were very impressed by that. And also their consensus algorithm, which at the beginning was Narwhal and Bullshark, and today is Mysticeti. And now they're upgraded to Mysticeti V2. It created the exact type of performance we wanted on the one side. On the other side, it also creates, it's called a reliable broadcast channel, which was kind of a requirement for the MPC algorithm to work within a network. So we have, I won't get into exactly what it means, but essentially the signers need to broadcast messages, and it needs to be reliable. They need to know that if they broadcasted it, then the other parties received it in order for the protocol to work. And Mysticeti and Narwhal and Bullshark, all the consensus algorithms include a reliable broadcast channel, but in a way that has super low latency, super high throughput. So it really checked all the boxes for us. So initially we forked Sui and just used them to like implement 2PC MPC. And we gradually got to know the team and created a really strong partnership. And now we're using, for the IKA network, the network of signers, we're using the broadcast channel of Mr. SETI, of the consensus algorithm, but everything else is coordinated on SUI. Our token lives on SUI. All of the reading and writing of the state happens on SUI. And the only reason we can actually do that is because SUI has such amazing superior performance that it's so fast that it can support coordinating off-chain actions in an on-chain way without harming performance. So this is kind of the story of how we ended up kind of very, very aligned and actually, you can say in some ways, running on top of SUI.
Amazing. Couple of questions. You guys on testnet now?
IKA right now is on testnet. We've been on testnet for quite a while, and we're going to launch mainnet very, very soon.
Nice. And because I'm trying to understand the difference or similarities, or if they're the same, between IKA validators. And I think my understanding is there will be an IKA token and you can validate on the IKA network, and the SUI validators and what happens on the SUI. And by the way, Mr. SETI is a great name.
We don't want to call them validators. We're call them probably operators or signers or something like that, because IKA is not like an L1 in the traditional sense. So yeah, let's call them operators. The IKA operators operate the MPC protocol. So in order for generating a new Dwallet, remember we talked about DKG. So having a DKG process or generating a signature for a Dwallet, you would need to have the IKA operators performing the MPC algorithm and generating whatever they need to generate. But everything else is run on SUI. So the SUI validators manage entire state, manage smart contract execution. All of those things are things that the SUI validators manage. And we wanted to focus and be razor focused on like a very, very specific problem and solve it in the best way possible. And going back to the conversation around building infrastructure that can actually scale to support the world, I think this is how you need to think about things, like trying to do everything and trying to just like, put on more and more and more value. Eventually, you won't be able to provide that value to anyone. And SUI created an amazing, amazing work of creating super scalable and very, very seriously thought out design and infrastructure to be able to support a variety of use cases and values. And each one of them needs to be its own. They're launching Walrus now. Walrus does storage, and only storage in an amazing way. And all the smart contracts and the logic and all of that will live on SUI. But the storage will be coordinated on Walrus. We do threshold signatures and zero trust Dwallet. We do that amazingly well, but we do only that. We don't run smart contracts. We don't do like all of that happens on SUI. So I think being able to create a very robust modular infrastructure creates something that is much more sustainable and can work for the long term. And in blockchain, people say modular and they mean like patching scalability issues. Like this is not modularity. Modularity is everything works exactly the way it's supposed to, and it only does its specific function.
Is there any unique edge that SUI has? Like, let's say hypothetically, Vitalik calls you tomorrow and says, "Hey, we really like what you're doing." Is it technically possible to implement a similar 2PC MPC network starting on an EVM network, or would it make sense? Is it fine if it originates from SUI and then it connects the rest of the world and everyone gets benefit? How should people think about it?
So the question is, what are your requirements, right? So everything is possible, but if you want to do something on an EVM, if that's one of your requirements, you need to give up some other requirements. And eventually, I believe giving up those requirements of like speed, scalability, right, things like that, will mean that it will not be usable, or it will be usable as a POC, but it can't be infrastructure for the real world moving to Web3. And that's our goal here. Our goal here is to create infrastructure that allows the real world to move to Web3. So I don't think building on Ethereum or building on EVM should be a requirement, because who cares? Like the important thing is that it works. And I think the real requirements are what kind of activity it can support, what kind of performance it can offer, what type of decentralization it includes in it, what are the security guarantees that it offers. Those are the important requirements. And the only place today, and we searched, like we went through every single network, every single consensus algorithm, every single design and architecture. The only place that could be implemented today is SUI. And so that's why we're working with Sui. And I do think that the Sui team, come with this type of experience of building things that scale to billions of users. Like this is something that, people like to shit on them, or maybe I'm being too harsh, but to shit on, the fact that people come from Meta and like, it's Web 2 and they're not like, but these people have built things that support billions of users. This is a unique skill set that you need to have to build the rails for real world implementations.
I 100% agree. Look, I can see how you have backs to defend, and maybe it is an angle of attack that you're like a Facebook intern or whatever. But honestly, I've been around crypto for so long, I'm growing tired of seeing gigabrains who never break out of the engineering circle or never break out of like an academic circle. I'm tired of seeing applications with incredible potential that look like shit. Teams that don't even know that a graphic designer can be hired. User experience matters in 2025. I have very little tolerance now for those things. Like I've spent a couple of years shouting at the wind, giving unlimited, unsolicited feedback to a bunch of projects, and I don't see them getting any better. So I've reached a stage in my life where I'm like, look, these people are not going to win. Whether I help them or not, they're just not going to win. Like if you don't get a quality designer in 2025. So yeah, I really admire the SO team. I wish I got involved earlier. I remember meeting the team in South Korea in 2022. They were barely on testnet. But the girl at the call, I don't know if she's still around, but she gave a presentation about Sui gaming. And it was so well thought out. It was the understanding of the market, the game dynamics, like everything, like the Web3 opportunity, their go-to market strategy. I was like, are you in a mainnet? And they were like, no, we're in testnet. But like their understanding of how to just go to work, no distractions, and day by day, they just keep scoring little wins that I think they're going to have a Solana moment where no one believed in them at first. And then before you know it, it's like too big to shit on them too much. I hope so. I think it'd be great. But yeah, I think we're getting a little bit sidetracked here.
Yeah. And so, yeah, like to go back to maybe like the use cases that I think we're seeing right now. And to be honest, like people always ask me to talk about like use cases for IKA. I think that it's kind of a double-edged sword because this is like very, very low level infrastructure that can be used in so many different use cases, and sometimes use cases that we can't even imagine today because they're not possible. And I'll give you a couple of examples, but it's important to talk about use cases because people need to kind of be able to start to kind of imagine and iterate from stuff. So one of the really interesting things that you have with this Dwallet concept is you move the traits that assets have in blockchains. So that's programmability and transferability. You move that to the account level. So instead of being able to program policies and logic and enforce them on assets and being able to transfer them, you're now able to do that on accounts. And like, this is the first time you can transfer an account. Think about it, right? If you have a private key, you can't give me that private key. I mean, you can, but you still have that private key, right? Like it doesn't matter that you gave it to me. But with a D-wallet, because a private key never existed, which is, remember when we talked about DKG, I told you like this opens up really interesting options. But now you can transfer the ownership and the control over an account to someone else in a trustless way where you don't have access to that account anymore. And now they have. And that opens up a lot of really, really interesting options. So just think about the first thing that comes to mind is like transferring portfolios of assets, right? Like, cool. That saves you like a lot of effort and gas fees and stuff. But what if you can take an entire account and use it for leverage, use it as collateral for a loan, and then just liquidate the entire account if something happens? You can now bypass the entire liquid staking token kind of industry that creates, again, a lot of risk, centralized risk around, when we hacked the 1% of Ethereum, that was 4% of Lido staked ETH. So potentially that could depeg all of staked ETH holders, right? What if you can get loans against your staking position without going through a liquid staking token? What if you could take native Bitcoin and lock it and just transfer the entire account instead of transferring the Bitcoin, and lock it and get a loan against your native Bitcoin without ever moving it from Bitcoin or from your account, right? What if you can take illiquid assets or soul-bound tokens and transfer them by transferring the account? What if you can speculate on the future value of an account, let's say speculating on the value of an airdrop, by having accounts that are farming airdrops and trading them and creating a market? Like, you can create liquid and efficient markets around things that you can't even imagine that you can do today. So I think, and that's just transferability. We haven't even talked about like the programmability of the account and everything that you can do today within a smart contract in an asset that exists in that network. You can now do natively on any other network because you can program whether or not the account size signatures. So like there's all this breadth of like use cases. And today, you know, the main categories that people focus on are like custody, DeFi, and Bitcoin programmability. But in general, I think there's so many interesting things that people are already starting to talk to me about. And I'm like, this is super cool. Like, you should definitely do that. You know, having a gaming account and being able to rent it out for other people to play without risking my assets, or being able to boost other people's accounts for money without them being worried about whether or not you're going to steal their account or not. Like, everything is trustless and you can just create all these super cool things around this new primitive. So I really feel like the next wave of, you know, innovative Web3 solutions that completely abstract the concept of, you know, different chains and different ecosystems away for the end users is going to be built on top of IKA.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm mostly familiar out of necessity when I be an early user with like the BTC Fi side of things. Mostly because in that evolution, dude, I remember way back in the day, I abridged BTC to WBTC on like the dodgiest, shitty website. It was like BTC Cafe or something. And, you know, you reach a point where you have enough WBTC where you start considering like, does the Bitcoin actually exist? Like, why is my Bitcoin living on this shitty layer 3? Like, I have to go through like 9 bridges. Like, at some point, you start to worry. So being able to access DeFi while having control of your like, actual assets and your Bitcoin, and if you get liquidated, at least they take the real Bitcoin, is really exciting, especially because the BTC community has traditionally been a little bit isolated. Like the same vision and concerns that Vitalik has, I guess, that have it to a million extent. They don't like to have BTC in other networks.
It's funny that a lot of the Web3 community are like, oh, these like BTC people, they live in the past. But that's like because they understand the risk that bridging, there's less than 1% of Bitcoin that is bridged, because the vast majority of Bitcoin holders will never give up their native Bitcoin. And for a good reason. They understand that when they do that, they don't own their Bitcoin anymore.
If you think about it, oh, there's only 21 million Bitcoins. Yeah, there's only 21 million Bitcoins on the Bitcoin network. But once you start wrapping and bridging, dude, you could have, I mean, I think somebody mentioned that they should have like a law against hypothecation of BTC, now that different states will be getting involved. As you think about it, you can have one Bitcoin in, one wrap BTC. That wrap BTC crosses a bridge. Now there's 2 wrap BTC in 2 different places. And off it goes. Like it never stops. So that's going to be an interesting use case. But yeah, as you mentioned, like there's so many possibilities. I'm thinking probably another low-hanging fruit. It's going to be like succession planning. You know, have a law firm or some family members so that, you know, if you kick the bucket unexpectedly.
Yeah, absolutely. Estate planning is definitely one of the early use cases we actually had in mind. And I think in general, that's kind of under the big umbrella of custody. In general, what you can do with Dwallet and with IKA is you can think about like a decentralized, flexible, robust version of Fireblocks, or like a multi-chain version of Gnosis Safe. And you can build all of these policies and all of these different scenarios and different access control mechanisms on top of any asset on any chain, and be able to put that all in like one smart contract. So I definitely think, estate planning is something that is going to be like a very successful product that utilizes IKA. But yeah, in general, like you can think about the current like financial and not even financial, like human system of identity management and asset management, like that all always requires sharing and access control. If you're the only one who can touch your things, like you can't do anything with that. You have to give certain access, but you need to make sure that access is managed in a certain way. And in Web3, it needs to be managed in a decentralized way, which IKA enables.
We've been going on for a while, and I do value your time a lot. So over the next 2 hours to 6 months, how can people get involved? I know that there's a testnet validator program going on.
And there is an incentivized testnet for validators that's going to happen now. Probably by the time you air that, I don't know when you're going to air it, but might be a bit too late. But in any case, join the Discord. We're doing a lot of things, both for community members, for node operators, for developers. You know, everything is kind of coordinated through Discord. Follow us on Twitter for announcements. We're going to X, sorry, not Twitter. I keep saying Twitter. And we're going to launch mainnet very soon. So an announcement is coming up. So if you want to be involved as we launch and to start building, if you are a builder and you want to build right now, the testnet is available. We already have quite a few builders. Some of them are going to be live on day one when we launch. And definitely just join the community. There's a super enthusiastic and really excited community, kind of imagining the future with IKA and getting involved. Our mutual friend Illuminifty created a pretty cool brand that people like to engage with. Just today, by the way, a rap song about IKA was dropped, which is legitimately one of the best rap songs I have heard in a while.
To go find it.
You have to. I shared it on my X account, and dude, it is legit. There's a line there like, better pivot because IKA is gonna make you obsolete or something like that. It's like, it's legit. But
That's
yeah,
great.
like, some guy did a tattoo of IKA. Like there are like crazy shit going on in our community, from like deep tech, cool ideas to really degenerate stuff. So wherever you are on the spectrum, I'm sure you can find your place there. So yeah, join a Discord, follow us on X and socials, and yeah, join us as we start our mainnet journey very, very soon.
That's awesome. What's the anatomy of a filter? Like, is it people building things in SUI and then they can use IKA to get like multi-chain functionality, or some of these specific MPC kind of logic? Like, if I'm a builder, like generic, and I'm interested in going over to SUI or IKA, how should I think about it?
Right now, in order to utilize IKA, yeah, you have to build on SUI. In general, we would recommend builders to come check out SUI because I do think it has by far the best developer experience and also the best user experience. So the protocols you would build will have like a much better performance. And in general, I think SUI is just having a moment right now. And so if you're a developer and you want to build something new and cool and unique, there's no better place to build it than SUI, and there's no better tech within SUI to use than IKA.
It's a nice way to wrap it up. David, thanks so much for your time. Will I see you at SUI Summit in Denver?
Absolutely. Are you going to be there?
Right. I haven't booked anything yet, but FOMO always gets the best of me. I've been there for the last 3 years, so I'll try to make it this time as well.
You should definitely come. I think SUI Summit is going to be insane now in Denver. And there's also SUI Basecamp in May, I think, in Dubai, if you're not going to be able to make it there. Yeah, we're definitely going to have presence in all the major SUI events. So yeah, come say hi.
Amazing. Well, I'll look out for you. And thanks so much for the time. We're going to have you on again. I still have so many questions around IKA for AI agents and IKA for world domination, but we'll get around to it one thing at a time.
Okay, awesome. It was great talking to you.